I'm huge into music, and I mean, I started when I was like, 12, like into like hair metal bands like Rad and Quiet Riot and stuff like that. And I remember the first bands I heard that totally changed my worldview were like Megadeth and Metallica and Slayer. And then I heard punk rock, and when you first get into punk rock, it's kind of not cool to like metal. So I kind of transitioned straight to punk rock. And plus, when you're a teenager, punk rock speaks a lot more to you. So I was listening to punk rock. I was going to see punk rock bands a lot. I go to DC all the time. There were smaller clubs in DC, but especially in those days, the Marion Barry years were bad. The cops were so crooked that they gave DC enough money to double the police force in 2 years. They didn't even run background checks. They had wanted felons in other states who were now DC police officers. So DC was pretty bad. So there were some clubs that were in really sketchy neighborhoods. That's all that punk clubs could afford. But I always had to see bands. I didn't care where it was, I had to go see the bands. I remember the kind of main one, like the CBGBs in DC, was 930 Club. And I saw everybody there. I saw GBH, I saw L7, I saw Helmet, I saw Smashing Pumpkins when they weren't even signed to anything yet. I saw a bunch of bands there. That was a huge influence on everything I did. I wanted to do artwork for bands, but I didn't really know how. So I remember I talked to Tim Yohannan from Maximum Rock and Roll, and they were in California, so I just shot him. I think I wrote him a letter. I didn't even have a computer at that point. And he wrote me back to say he loved my artwork, and he wanted me to do a cover for them and do illustrations for this massive article inside their magazine. So I did cover, he didn't like it. I did another cover, he didn't like it. And by that point, my job was as a bike messenger. So I'd be biking 10 hours a day, come home, and draw. And it was kind of disappointing when he didn't like the first two that I did, that I spent, collectively between the two, at least 40 hours working on. But then the third one he loved, so we did that. And then because I did that, some other bands took notice, and I started doing stuff for, there was a band called More Complete. The full name was More Complete Psychosis. But I did stuff for them. I remember I did stuff for Purr, I did stuff for Koshari. I went to art school, and my art teacher, he was really complimentary of my stuff. And he said, if you want a career, you've got to move to New York. So I moved to New York, and I was thinking I'm going to be a comic artist. But I didn't get a job as a comic artist right away, and when I finally did get an interview with them, they were huge letdown. They paid almost nothing, they demanded a ton of work. But I was like, okay, what else can I do with my artwork? Bands are always broke. They always want artwork. They love somebody who does artwork. They're always broke. So I go talk to the band, talk to the band members. The really important bands that weren't even from the area but were touring, after they play a gig, I'd go up and I'd talk to them and I'd try and convince them that I should do artwork for them. I was going to a lot of shows at CBGBs and Coney Island High, and Castle Heights and stuff like that. And I had a lot of friends who were in bands. One of my favorite bands, Lisse, was there. They played at Coney Island High. I talked to them after that show. That's how I did artwork for them. And I gave Sean Ingram, the singer from Lisse, I gave the first tattoo ever. At the time, I was still learning how to tattoo. And I tattooed, it was like a skateboarding symbol on the inside of his arm, in red ink. And it was pretty big. I did the album cover for them. They were one of the only bands that paid me for an album cover. I was doing the music stuff as I started tattooing. When I first started tattooing, that's the most money I'd ever made. Before that, I worked as a dishwasher and a cook and a waiter. I'm a horrible waiter. So some waiters make a lot of money. I didn't make a lot of money. I remember when I started tattooing, I made half my rent in one day. So I was like, I can't believe this is so much money. So I didn't even care at that point, if bands paid me. Before I was worried about paying rent and paying bills and stuff. Now I could pay rent and bills. I was just happy to do artwork for bands. And so I was working at flash shops in the city, and while I was working at the flash shops, I'd have downtime, if you weren't banging out tattoos, I'd be working on paintings. I had everything set up, so I'd be working on tattoo, working on a painting, working on tattoo, working on a painting. Purity Records, they just started up, and they were a hardcore label, and they put out a compilation. Unsound was on it. There were a bunch of other decently large bands that were on it, and he wanted me to do the front and the back, and I said, what should I do? He said, anything you want. so which was great. Indecision, I remember when I first met Indecision, they all lived in Brooklyn. Went down and met them at a diner in Brooklyn, and we were talking, we were discussing everything. I remember Justin Marino was really into my stuff. He was like, "Oh, you're gonna be like our Raymond Pettibon," and I'm a big Black Flag fan, so I'm not a huge fan of Raymond Pettibon's style, but I definitely like his subject matter, and I understood what he meant by that. And of course, I was on a high horse when he wanted me to be the Raymond Pettibon, so I did like some short covers for them. I did some illustrations for like flyers and for ads for them, and I remember they got signed by a new label. There's a new label out called MIA Records. They put out like a string of releases and then they folded. But I remember when that new label came out and they asked me to do their album cover, and I just got the Coalesce album cover, and Coalesce is one of my favorite bands. So I was like, I don't think I have time, guys. I'm sorry, which is unfortunate. But yeah, I did a lot of stuff with them. Shy Lewd was one of my favorite bands, and I remember I saw them live, and afterwards I went to talk to Matt Fox, and I said, "Yeah, I really like your band. I'd like to do some artwork for you." I had a little portfolio, like I had a metal cover on it. It looked all slick because I was interviewing with like Penguin Books and DC Comics, and so it was my professional portfolio of artwork. So I showed it to him. He was impressed. He really liked it. He's like, yeah, we'd love for you to do some artwork. A lot of the stuff I did for Shy Lewd, I did while I was tattooing. I was working on this whole painting, and I was about 35 hours into it when it came down with brain cancer. So I called Matt Fox from an ICU bed and said, "Hey man, I have brain cancer," and he was super surprised. He was like, "What the fuck?" And I was like, "I'm gonna finish your painting." He's like, "Just get better." I'm like, "No, I really want to finish your painting. Even if I die, I want to finish your painting." They had a side project band called Zombie Apocalypse, and they asked me to do a cover for that. I said, "What do you want?" They're like, "Oh, we don't care." So I did a scene from the book Death Scenes, and like they're old police photos from like the 1930s. So I like juiced it up a little bit and colorized it. It's like, "Oh, it's too horrifying. Nobody will buy our album." I was like, okay. So then he picked another painting I'd done. I would say it's like pretty close to as gruesome. About the first guy taken for a ride. Like they cut his lips off, they cut his tongue out, they dumped him in the river, with concrete shoes. And they really wanted to use that instead. So I said, okay, you can use that. Oh, well, if these bands are still open, maybe the bigger bands would be. I remember I even wrote Megadeth at one point, but the guy who does Megadeth album covers is pretty awesome. So, that's some pretty heavy competition there. They didn't get back to me. I remember I wrote to Obituary too, but they just broken up. Music kind of kept me alive. I remember the band Dead Guy, which is still one of my favorite bands. I must listen to that album like every other day. And I remember Tim Singer, the singer for Dead Guy, I remember I got a hold of him and I said, "Your band kept me alive in my 20s. If it wasn't for your band, there would be no more me." And it's like, oh, he was really nice. He was like, "Oh, thank you so much." But it's true.